Welcome back to LewyT's Amusement Academy. This is part 4, and we will learn how to make our game world more interesting with the use of a Unity terrain object. Okay, we have our cute little slime character, and he can interact with the world in a very basic way, but our world is pretty boring. Big, empty plain. So, let's see if we can make something more interesting. Now, before we start messing with the world, I do want to save our slime character so that if we accidentally delete it or something, we don't have to build it again from scratch. So, in the project, we're going to go to the assets level and make a new folder. You can right-click in the blank space, create folder. In the folder we're going to call Prefabs. Go to that folder, and then I'm going to drag this thing, or it says the nested parent capsule unpack, this whole thing into that folder. Now, because it was already a prefab in a different place, but without the slime character in it, it gives us this question: do you want to make a new original prefab or a variant of the existing? I'm going to say new original. Now we have this prefab in this folder. We can actually delete the character out of the game, out of the hierarchy, and then we can drag it back in. And there it is. It comes back, and we hit play. Everything will work the same way as it did before. Do. Okay. So the thing I want you to learn about that is that your project folders are a more permanent place to save stuff. In your hierarchy, this is just what's going on in the game at the moment. Like when you start the game, that's what's in there. So the main thing we want to accomplish today is make this world more interesting. So right now it's a plain. What's more interesting than a plain? Well, maybe mountains? Some sort of terrain? So there is actually a object that you can add to your game called a terrain. We're going to right click in the hierarchy, go to 3D object, and go down to terrain, click on that. So there's the terrain. If we can move around, you see how this is kind of weird glitching? That is because the terrain object is the exact same position as the plane that we put on there before. And then I can delete the plane so they don't get mixed up. Boom, now the terrain is there and the plane is gone, and it's basically another big plane. We need to back up from the terrain so we can see it a little bit better. It's really huge. And then if you select the terrain, you've got this big circle that follows your mouse around whenever you're hovered over that terrain object. So in the inspector, there's these 5 buttons. There's create neighboring terrains, which just means like if that one big terrain isn't enough, you can actually make more terrain objects that connect to it. We'll do that real quick. Just click on one of these spaces, and boom, there's another terrain object there. Now, that adds a lot of stuff pretty quick. So I'm going to undo those changes, because we really don't need more than one for what we're doing today. We'll go a little bit closer again. Okay, so the next button in this inspector, the terrain component, the next button is called Paint Terrain. Underneath Paint Terrain is a drop down of different types of ways you can paint the terrain. Raise or lower terrain is the default setting, so I'll show you what that does. You click, it makes a hill or a mountain. Let's make one over close to our character. That's a big one. Now if we hit play, we can kind of go look and see what that mountain looks like. Okay, there we are. And there's the mountain we just made. It's really enormous. I can't even look. My camera controller doesn't let me tip back far enough to see the top. And it's too steep to go up. There's another one we made over there. That is what raise and lower terrain does. Now, we'll go back in here, and the idea of raise and lower is important because if you left click, it raises, and if you hold down the shift key on your keyboard and left click, it lowers. So let's just erase some of these. If you shift right click, it basically lowers the parts that have been raised, and that it only lowers it down to a certain point. A little bit closer. That mountain is way too tall. I'm going to erase it. When you're in this raise or lower terrain, you've got these different brushes. So this first brush is just a hard circle. If you pick a more soft circle, it makes a less dramatic mountain. Now, if you click and drag, it will still be a very huge spike. Now, obviously, that's too high. So we're going to shift click and kind of try to reduce those back down to a manageable level. Now let's go back to the game and see what they look like. Okay, there's this soft, the first little click that I did made this fairly dramatic looking hill, but the other clicks that I didn't completely erase make even larger hills, steeper. So that's the thing about this particular mode of painting terrain, is that it's really easy to overdo the mountains. Now, the way you can prevent that, let's go back, is this setting. It says opacity. It's like how strong, how much of a change one click does, or one click and drag, how much that will actually change the terrain. So I like to keep the opacity pretty low. Let's go down to like 20 or something. Get a little bit closer so we can see the difference. So I'm going to do one real bit, just one quick click. Now that's right next to the other one that was a quick click at a high opacity. And then over here we'll do some dragging around, and we can see it's quickly making mountains, but it's they're not instantly going to the sky. Now I'm going to play. You can see the difference between that and the other. Okay, this was my first click with high opacity, and then this little hill that I can actually get on top of was the click with low opacity. And then those other hills were dragging. This is something you might really enjoy playing around with. There is other brushes besides the two we've done so far. This other brush here is an even softer looking brush. We will do this one over here. Can't even tell that it did anything. Here is one that's kind of looks a little bit lumpy and random. If you increase the size, you can make a much bigger brush, say something like that. And we're going to click and drag a little bit. It makes a much larger hill, but it's a little bit lumpy. There's a few more. There's one. There's another one. Even more lumpy. Anyway, you get the idea. Okay, so now let's explore our world. So there was the first click. Here's the low opacity brush click, and then this is a low opacity but with a different kind of brush, so it made an even smaller hill. You can see the giant hills in the background. Let's go through here. So this player character allows you to go up slopes, but there is a maximum steepness that it can handle. Now we're on one of the lumpy hills. You can tell that it looks much more realistic, much more like real terrain. However, of course, real terrain does not look like a checkerboard. You want something to look more like the real ground, so we will learn how to do that next. So in addition to create neighbor terrains, paint terrain, in the paint terrain button, there is these settings, and one of them is paint texture. Now, when you select that, it has a texture. It's not doing anything. When I click, we need to add a terrain layer. So underneath this material is a terrain layer. So we'll create a layer. We have to pick what we're going to paint. Now we don't actually have any good type of textures that would look good on the ground. We've got this slime green thing. Now, when I select that, it makes the whole thing just a tiled version of the slime. And I am actually curious what that will look like in the game when you get close to it. Okay, there he is. He is just walking around on pictures of himself, which is a little creepy. But anyway, that definitely looks better than a checkerboard, but definitely not what I was really hoping for. So the next step is going to be to get some good ground textures. And guess where we're going to go? We're going to go to the Asset Store Web. Just search for ground texture. Change the price to free. Here's one I've already got. Just called Outdoor Ground Textures. There's a few more. Here's 25 stylized. You know that word stylized? It's just kind of not quite realistic. Let's just look at this one real quick. I've never got this one before. On here you can see it's got albedo, height, normal, occlusion, and metallic textures, which is a something that we might talk about later. Looks like a lot of nice stuff. And it's free. Thank you, Game Buffs. Okay, I think this will do. Let's go ahead and add to my assets. We have to accept the terms of service. And then open in Unity. Goes to the package manager. And it's already selected on this 25 plus free stylized textures. We're going to download. After it's done downloading, we're going to import to project. Here is all the stuff we're going to import. Okay, now that it's finished importing, it is in our project, and under assets, there is a new folder called Game Buffs. Open that up. It's got free stylized textures, so let's go to textures. Each one of these folders under here is one of the textures, but it's more than just one picture. Let's find one. I like this Arctic forest ground one. I think that looked pretty interesting. Let's open that up. And as you can see, there is a bunch of images. Let's zoom in. We can see the images better. We're going to add a terrain layer. No, it's the texture we need to put in our world. Arctic forest ground, albedo. Now, this looks much better, so I'm going to remove this other one. Edit terrain layers, remove layer. Okay, so that removed that one. Now what's left is the one that's showing. We'll get down and look closer at it. Okay, looks pretty interesting. the idea of painting textures isn't just that we're going to have the whole world look the same. You want to be able to make certain parts have different looks. So let's add another layer. Cliff rock. Let's try this one. Okay. Now I'm going to make my brush smaller so I can paint, do something like that. I'm going to paint this hill, this cliff rock color, and it turns into that texture. And then if you get close to where the transition between the two was, you can see that it basically gradually goes from the grass ground over to the rocky texture. So we can do that. I'm going to paint some of these mountains this color, this rocky color. Okay, now let's add one more. Cracked ice. Crystal surface. That's interesting. Let's try that one. Go edit, create a layer, and we can actually start typing what we're looking for. Crystal. Okay. And albedo is the one that we want. That's the regular colorful look of a particular texture. So I'm gonna keep adding these rock cliff to the mountains. Now let's go back into the game and see what it all looks like. Okay, we're walking around on the grass, and then there's rocky cliff type of stuff. We get into the hills, that's more rocky looking. We're gonna go over these hills if we can, if it's not too steep. That wasn't. And now you can see in the distance the Crystal Mountains. And those will probably be too steep to go up. But we get to look at them anyway. Okay, that's all great. However, it still looks kind of flat. And maybe you don't know what I mean, but there's some other options we can make it look even more interesting. So this forest ground has not just the albedo, but it also has a normal, the bumpiness of the surface. As we switch between these two, you can see below here the material changes, but all we have is the diffuse. We use the albedo, that's just the regular color. But there's the normal map, which is empty, and the mask map, which is empty. We're going to drag normal onto normal. Everything goes blue because it has to recalculate the texture. Maybe you can't tell anything different right now. And then we'll put the mask onto the mask. And now we can kind of see everything looks a little bit different. So let's go ahead and go into the game and see what it looks like up close. Okay, so if we look at an angle where we can see kind of the light of the sky reflecting onto the ground, you can see that it's got more of a texture to it than it did before. And that's because of the normal map and possibly to a degree the mask map. Now, the rocky texture still looks pretty flat because we didn't change the rocky texture at all. So let's go ahead and do that next. Go to the rocky texture. and that one was called Cliff or something. Cliff rock surface. So we have the albedo, and then we need the normal, the mask. And then I'm going to go ahead and do the crystal while I'm at it. Crystal. Mask goes here. Normal goes there. Now, we'll go into play mode and see what it looks like. Okay, our grassy ground looks like that. Now, the rocky ground also looks a little more interesting. Let's go into an area where there is more rocks. Yep, when you see the light reflecting off of it, you can see that normal map changes the texture of the way it looks. We're going to keep going. We're over on the grass again. Just makes everything look a little more interesting, and you could say, to agree, you could call it more realistic, but of course this is kind of a cartoony looking textures and game, so I wouldn't go so far as to call it realistic. Let's see if we can get a look at this crystal mountain in a way that makes it look, so if we can see the difference. But I mean, it does look better to me. It's hard to get close to the crystals because I intentionally put them way up high. Now maybe up here in that curved part of the mountain, you can kind of see the transition into the crystal shape and the way it looks different than just as if it was painted on the ground. Okay, I've created a few more texture layers for our terrain to use. Now, one thing I noticed that I wanted to point out that you might come across is whenever I created a new layer by going to Edit Terrain, Create Layer, it actually creates a file in the folder that you're in. So if, depending on where you're at in the project, it creates a file. So when I was looking at the Arctic forest grass terrain, this texture, and when I created it, it created this new layer texture here, and then I was still in this folder when I created the rocky cliff layer, so it created this rocky cliff layer in that folder too. Now as I went to another folder, one thing that you can do in the inspector sometimes when you click on a button or a tile or a field in the inspector, it takes you to the folder where in the project where that object comes from. So if I click on this crystal, boom, it moves me to the folder where the crystal surface is, and I was looking at this folder when I created that crystal layer texture, and so the new layer is here. And the same thing happened with these others that I did later. So there is a new layer for each one of these. Now the trouble with that is that they're all just called new layer. It's not a big deal. You can rename them. Click, wait a little bit, click again on the name, and I can call this, I'll just do sand with a capital S. Press enter. I'm going to click on the terrain again, and now my sand layer is just called sand. So it's much easier to read than just new layer on everything. Now, it also doesn't matter what it's called. If you're going by the way it looks visually, then you don't need to rename everything just for consistency. That's the sort of thing I would do, but you do not need to do that. Okay, I wanted to show you some other things that you can do with the terrain object. So I'm selected on the terrain. I'm going to go back up so I can see a little bit more of the terrain. In this inspector component, we're in the paint terrains. I want to call this a tab. we've looked at paint texture, and we've also looked at raise or lower terrain. This is set height. So I'll show you that quickly. You can set a number height. So I think right now everything is at 0. So if I were to try to paint a 0 on this, nothing happens. But if I go onto something that's higher than 0, it pushes it down to 0. Okay? So if let's say I make it a 10. Now, I paint that, it goes up, but it doesn't go any higher than a 10. And if I go up to something that's higher than a 10, it will go down, but it won't go any lower than a 10. So basically, you can specify a base height of a particular, like it's great for making things like plateau or something. It's good for making flat surfaces. It would work better for like a house to sit on, because usually houses are designed to sit on a flat surface. The next option in this drop-down is paint holes. I'm going to make a smaller brush. I'm going to paint a hole right here on the side of this mountain. Boom, and there you go. I'm going to just get closer so we can see what it just did. It made a hole in the terrain. It's literally part of the ground is not there. And if you're playing the game and you walk over to that hole, you will just fall through because the ground is no longer there. If you want to use holes in your terrain, you probably want to use some other object to give you something to walk on if you're going to go through a hole. From inside, the rest of the world looks really strange because from inside the terrain, everything's invisible. You can't even see the inside surface. So if you have a hole, it gives you your players the option to be able to see through from the backside into something, which is confusing. They may not understand what they're looking at, and it looks like a glitch. So if that's what you're going for, then that's fine. But I would use holes sparingly, only, and usually build some sort of other object around here to cover up the hole, and so that you can maybe walk through it, but you're inside of a tunnel or something. Stamp terrain. I don't actually remember what this is. Oh, it's like, really, it looks like set height. Oh, but it's quick. Okay, so this is a little bit different than set height. So when we did set height, and you click on something, it just increases a little bit, just like raise or lower terrain does. But if you hold it down for a while, it will continue to grow until it gets to the height at the level that you specified at 10. But this stamp terrain, one click, and it's at that height. In fact, I don't think you can even drag. The first click is all that counts. Smooth height. It allows you to kind of smooth. So I guess what you could say that smooth height does is it brings things up that are lower than your cursor and brings things down that are higher than your cursor. If you do it on just a flat surface, it doesn't do anything. But if you do it where it's part of it is on a high part and part is on a low part, and then move a little bit, it kind of smooths that area. So you could use that to make a ramp. It's actually kind of a nice looking ramp over there. Let's go look at it closer. So that's a nice use of smooth height. You might not use this very much. Okay, thank you for watching LewyT's Amusement Academy Part 4. Next time, we will continue to work on the terrain and add trees. Trees is a big subject by itself, but we will do a few more things, finishing up a very detailed terrain map.